So, Susan, thank you so much for joining me this morning, your afternoon. We're kind of in a little bit of a role reversal. Usually Susan is interviewing various members of the Switch team. And today I have the opportunity of actually asking you a few questions and kind of getting your opinion. So why don't we start by having you introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, firstly, thank you very much for having me. My name is Susan. I'm dialing in from London, and we're having quite a grey day of weather over here today. I lead the Smart Building Research Division at Verdantix, and we're a team of analysts publishing research on technologies to optimize buildings. So that's anything from room booking software right through to IoT platforms and digital twins for buildings. And what's really interesting is at Verdantix, we actually have a separate team of research analysts looking at technology to optimize corporate health and safety processes. And actually right now we're seeing a lot of convergence between the smart building agenda and the health and safety agenda. So that's been really interesting for us over the past few weeks. And just as a personal intro, I've been covering the building technology sector for 10 years now, and I've got a background in sustainability.
Awesome, great. Yeah, obviously Switch Automation has been working with our customers throughout the last several months on all things to help in terms of resilience as it relates to COVID and helping with building shutdowns, and now in some communities we're helping with the startup process. So it has been really an interesting time for the smart building and property technology industries as a whole. So we'll talk a little bit about that this morning. I've got a couple of questions to help kind of frame us as we start our discussion. So when you think about everything going on right now in the world and with real estate and prop tech, what is the problem that you think we're trying to solve right now as it relates to getting people back into buildings and in the built environment as a whole?
Yeah, that's a good question. And what we've seen through our research is the current focal point right now is trying to aid the safe reopening of workplaces. So a lot of companies still have a lot of their staff working from home. So the current focus is how do we bring our staff back? And at Verdantix, we often say that when you think about your return to work and return to building strategy, you should be thinking about the 3 S's. So making your strategy safe, simple, and supportive. And a lot of people have been talking about the safety element, which is of course very important, and we talk about safety first. But actually something that I think is also interesting to think about is making these programs feel very simple to the occupants. We've seen some of the retailers as they look to reopen their shops. Some of them have had very complex programs in place around appointment setting, one-way traffic flows around the shops. And you do wonder, is this too complex for someone to really understand and follow? So that's what we're seeing to be the focal point of everyone's kind of thinking right now.
I love that. I love the simple. Just yesterday I saw an image floating around on LinkedIn, and it was 3 bins of like the wristbands, and each color represented how that individual felt about social distancing. And this idea that some of us are really trying to keep that distance for a variety of reasons. Others might be a little bit more comfortable. And then there's somewhere in between. And so I thought, when you think about simple, you couldn't be more simple than a red, yellow, green, as far as, visual cues and colors that people can quickly understand without, having to kind of get overly complicated with the other devices that we've seen out there with, you know, Bluetooth and it'll buzz when someone's within my 6-foot bubble and all these different things. So yeah, that's great. I think we could go too far and risk kind of setting us backwards in terms of prop tech and things. Do you think that this time is going to be like a breakthrough period for technology in the built environment? Do you think that this is going to kind of, when we look back in 10 years, we'll think, wow, this, you know, while it was really challenging for the industry as a whole and for humanity, that, you know, property and technologies will kind of have their renaissance around this time?
Yeah, absolutely. I think now what we're seeing is that for some technologies that have been with us for many years, if we think about technologies related to the IoT, we're seeing entirely new use cases for these technologies. So if we look at sensors for the workplace, these have been around for many years, but today firms are accelerating their deployment because the new use case is around occupant health and safety. And that's something that's really compelling, and there's a big trigger point there. I think in many ways, though, some of the kind of barriers for technology implementation are still there. We know that some firms have been limited in how ambitious their technology programs can be because it's difficult to get data out of building systems. We know that a problem has been lack of budget, and those factors are not going away. In fact, budgets are tighter now than ever. So I certainly think it's going to accelerate parts of the smart building ecosystem, particularly where there's a strong link to this kind of big focal point right now around well-being and safety. But actually, some of the fundamental barriers are still with us.
Yeah. That makes me think of my next question, which is, what are the considerations, you know, roles and responsibilities of accessing and utilizing data? Because when in your example, I think it starts to bring out the occupant, the tenant, as well as then, you know, a landlord, a building owner, a property management team, and then perhaps even some vendors and third parties that are also being brought in to assist with reopening. So when you think about all the different stakeholders, you know, do you have any thoughts around kind of different considerations, roles, and responsibilities for each of those?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I guess if we take this kind of scenario of kind of better data on air quality, just as an example one, I can see the strongest incentive there is really for the tenant to be investing. So we know that the real estate world is one of many split incentives. And if we think about great air quality and being able to monitor that through data, a tenant is going to be very clearly incentivized to invest in that. They will have their own employees going into that building, and they will be the ones benefiting from the good air quality, whether that's through just better well-being or better concentration levels. It's actually really interesting if you think about kind of, should the landlord be stepping into this? Should the landlord be the one investing in the kind of metering infrastructure, the sensors, and the whole digital infrastructure layer that you need? And there are big questions there. I know in most leases, landlords haven't signed themselves up to deliver great air quality. There might be stipulations around temperature levels, but they haven't promised great air quality in many cases. So there could be a scenario whereby tenants returning to their buildings push it back to the landlord and say, landlord, can you guarantee that the building that my staff are returning to will be good quality and it will be safe? I think in that situation, it may be a bit of a David and Goliath situation. If you think about a very small tenant that doesn't have much weighting, I can't see them being able to really push their landlord to start delivering a new service. On the flip side, if you're a tenant and you're a pretty big name, and maybe you hold a lot of real estate with this landlord, I think particularly now, you'll have a much stronger lever. Landlords across all sectors are really looking to retain their tenants right now, so it could be an opportunity to use that bit of extra leverage you have and try to push your landlords to make the investment.
Yeah, it's so interesting. When you start to think about small businesses, they do
Yeah.
tend to lack that buying power, whether it's real estate or anything else.
Yeah.
So it could, to me, in my mind, kind of calls out that role for these various business associations and groups that help kind of pool the power of small and medium-sized businesses and then represent them in a bigger way so that they can have a voice. But yeah, you're right. I mean, at the end of the day, it is about dollars and cents. And I hope that landlords will use this opportunity to kind of differentiate their products in the market so that people can use that information to make more informed choices about where they put their team, and perhaps about if they think their team belongs in a traditional office environment or not. So I think we'll see a lot of both.
Yeah. And I can certainly see things changing in the prime end of the real estate market. If we look back over the past 10 years, in the very competitive real estate environments, landlords have often looked to stand out, often on the sustainability angle. So they've invested to get green credentials for their buildings. But certainly post-COVID, that will still be important. But I can certainly, and you already see it in London, in the kind of prime market, landlords will be promoting the well-being angle of their building. And how do you prove that? There will certainly be a stronger role for the data monitoring angle around air quality.
Yeah, and we in the US have also seen some marketing in New York City in certain neighborhoods that are in lower lying areas, perhaps in a floodplain or have had issues with flooding from hurricanes in the past, and they're now marketing as resilient properties. And so trying to show through the signage as buildings are under construction that you can still have those great water views and be in a resilient building, which I think resilience too is going to take on a different definition in our industry. Like, what is resilience when you think about a building? And I think now it really does have to capture the ability for that building to get people back in fast, that they can use technology and use more advanced systems to lock down a building quickly, but also reopen quickly. And so I think that's another one of those, kind of opportunities for certifications or for marketing or for, some new ideas that could go into resilience as well. Cool. I wanted to ask, so when we think about the role of data, and I agree, I think that tenants do have a responsibility in getting good air quality, either demanding it or at least starting to invest in some ability to capture data so that they can understand a little bit more granular how is their air quality. Do you feel like the tenant is the primary one responsible for this, or is there an opportunity for, let's say, a group of tenants to talk to a landlord about getting more data access? So, is it the tenant's responsibility to chase down data, or is there an opportunity there for perhaps the building ownership to start sharing it more freely?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I expect this will be a tenant-led movement. As I mentioned, the tenant is really the one with the strong incentives to make sure their building has great air quality, because it's their staff using that space. At the same time, should landlords care? Well, yes, absolutely. They should definitely, this is something they should definitely be caring about. It almost feels as though it's part of their duty of care as a landlord to be providing a building which is safe for people to use. And also, actually, I think it's something that the landlord should be getting very actively involved in themselves. I mean, we've spoken before, Patti. Imagine a situation whereby a tenant brings their own sensors into a workplace and starts discovering areas of poor air quality or poorly performing humidity levels. And they now have that data first, and they start taking it to their landlord saying, I'm not being looked after well, look at the quality of my air. On the flip side, if we have a landlord which is actually taking the matter into their own hands and actively tracking these metrics, I think they'll be in a much stronger position to support tenant engagement. And we all know that landlords, kind of two really important things that they're looking to keep on top of is retaining their tenants, and also another thing is being able to let out their buildings much faster. So I think it will be a tenant-led initiative, but it's definitely a good opportunity for landlords to get really stuck in and drive better tenant experiences.
Yeah. And so we'll just stay on that for a minute. So if it's I agree. I think it is tenant-led. But let's think of a tenant that's unwilling or unable to invest in sensors or technology. Who do we advise them to ask if they want to see more daily data about air quality, temperature, humidity levels, even just data about how frequently the building is allowing fresh air in? Who would you suggest they talk to first?
So I think the first port of call would be them engaging with their property manager. And actually, maybe some of this data is already available and already being tracked. It's just the property manager thought there's no way my tenant would ever have any interest in this. Right. So I think it's raising it to that property manager and seeing what data is already available. At a more basic end, we were talking to a landlord the other week, and they are looking at providing their tenants more regular updates via email on how the building is being cleaned. So that's quite a basic initiative, but you can already see this data that wasn't typically accessible to the tenant is now being reported to them in a more regular fashion. Yeah. I think if it's a case that we need to put kind of new technology into this building to collect new data, I do think it could be valuable as a small tenant if you're able to club together with some other tenants in the building, so that instead of being kind of maybe a 1/5 of the building's floor area, you're now representing, let's say, 4/5 of it. You'll have a much stronger voice. And the way the property markets are right now, commercial landlords really want to hang on to their tenants. So I think it is actually a good opportunity right now to take that extra leverage that you have as a tenant and push for what you're looking for. The tracking of air quality, as an example, I understand from what I've seen, it's not a legal requirement. So you could well kind of face a bit of a brick wall here when you talk to your landlords, but it's definitely kind of feels the right time to be having these conversations.
So we've talked about air quality, which I think is, especially due to the nature of COVID-19 and what we were learning about how it spread, makes sense that that's where we're there's a lot of tension in this space, a lot of attention on air quality. But more recently, I caught some articles around the concerns around water and Legionnaire's disease. And the article that was really striking to me is that it came out of like an insurance perspective. So the insurers of commercial real estate now taking an interest in building management and facility management. Are you hearing anything about that in your research? Insurers getting more involved in this discussion, which when you think about where they sit in the ecosystem of real estate development, they're pretty essential. So any thoughts or any Verdantix research coming out around the role of an insurance company?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I haven't covered specifically the insurance angle, but I guess on a similar parallel is I have seen that some employers are increasingly worried about what risks they would face and what liabilities they take on with staff returning to the workplace.
Yeah.
So there have already been lawsuits against some of the large supermarket chains and against some of the food processing factories from employees that have caught the COVID disease. And these employees are saying they weren't suitably protected. Of course, they can't prove that they have got the kind of virus at the workplace, but what they have been able to show is that their employer was not taking the right steps to protect them. So I think that type of risk is really catching the attention right now of employers. And I've seen two main responses. So one is firstly really actively communicating how their safety and COVID management protocols are matching local guidance. So that's one thing they've been doing. But there's also been firms requiring their staff to sign waivers before they re-enter the workplace, saying that we accept the risk as soon as we walk through this door, and we will not sue you in the event that we get COVID. So I think certainly, Patti, the point you were bringing up there, from different angles, firms are now getting worried about what safety risks occupants face when they enter that door. And certainly in the UK, Legionella is highly regulated anyway. I know that firms will regularly check their water systems as part of their risk management program. But certainly with many buildings being turned down or turned off entirely in recent weeks, firms are kind of extra worried about what this means for water systems. And I think that's just kind of provoking new interest in that issue.
Yeah, and that's so, because I think again it will highlight the importance of facilities management as a discipline, as a respected profession in our communities. I know here in the U.S. we have a concern around kind of recruiting our next generation into this space of facilities management, and it's calling out that downtown Class A commercial office in a skyrise is managed with a team of on-site experts and engineers. And when you start to go out into our suburbs, our schools, small and medium-sized buildings and corporate office parks sometimes don't have that same level of oversight and attention to the operations. And so I think it's an interesting, another one of these moments in our industry where we would take a look at some best practices and try and share them with all building types, especially when you think about those school buildings that have sat basically empty for many months. And now, as we start to look to the fall and think about reopening schools, I think we'll probably start to hear more and more about that, and in the US at least, about our growing concerns of the just deferred maintenance and maintenance being kind of forgotten because of other budget constraints. It's really interesting. The other thing that's made me think of, especially as you start to think of the different classes of real estate, I know in some buildings downtown here in Denver, the building will be doing the health screening upon entry. So they've invested, they've taken the cost of having, the temperature scan and a very fast survey before anyone can come inside the building and up into their offices. Others are putting that onto the tenant. So the tenant has been given the instruction that they're required to do those two steps, the temperature read daily, as well as a health survey. I just wonder, it'll be interesting to see when you put the responsibility into your tenant's hands, does that prevent them from coming back? Because I can think of my team here, 25 people, small office space, and it's on me, it's on us as tenants to do that. And our response has been, we'll wait, because none of us really want to play that role for our team and be the enforcer. So any thoughts on that? Any thoughts on as real estate owners and operators kind of either take on the responsibility or instruct tenants? Do you think that will have any impacts on how fast we get people back into office space? Or
yeah, that's a really interesting point. And actually, if we think this through, if you have a multi-tenant building, in some ways, is it fair to push that back onto the tenant? Because you may find that half your building is kind of following all these health checks and half the building isn't. So is it fair to the tenants that are really engaged in health checking that half your building isn't following that? So I do think in the scenario whereby you have so many different companies in one building, it starts becoming much fairer to everyone if you have a landlord that's happy to come in and take some ownership of the whole health checking agenda. So I certainly think that's the case. I think in contrast, if you have kind of a major anchor tenant in a building, maybe 80% of the building is let to one tenant, in that case, you may find it's more of a tenant-led initiative. And we've actually seen with our research, a lot of firms have started off this health screening program at some of their headquarters. And they're just starting to kind of observe the kind of reception by their own employees before rolling this out more broadly. So yeah, I think it kind of depends on the makeup of your building. But as you say, kind of tenants themselves, they don't want to be the health checker, the health screener. They're coming to work to do their job. They're inviting visitors in to come and meet them, and they might not want to be the kind of the person running that check, because actually that could not be so good for some of their own client relationships. So in some ways it does feel a bit better keeping that kind of one step removed from the tenant itself.
Yeah, and the other thing it makes me think of, when this all started, there's been some, for obvious reasons, so much attention on the frontline worker and the healthcare workers. And I know at Switch we kept saying the frontline also includes our facilities professionals, the janitorial teams. That a lot of the buildings, while they are empty, there are still people there making sure that the buildings are kept safe and clean, and that a brand new asset doesn't somehow start to deteriorate because we just closed the doors and walked away. So I wonder if that's starting to play into the decision as well, that if you're a real estate company that has your own people managing that building, you want to keep them safe as well. And so perhaps placing that responsibility on yourself, in a way you're also sending a message to your own employees that you're looking out for your facilities professionals, because that they are also being exposed to all the tenants that they're working with, that they're cleaning the spaces for, that they're interacting with. And it's hard to, it's almost near impossible to understand how to control that if you're not just owning it yourself. Yeah, it's so many things to think about. It's and I'll tell you, we started the return to the office plan. We were hopeful. We communicated a plan just last week, and just yesterday, my boss and I think we're going to roll it back. We think we have it ready. We're cute and ready. We want to bring our team back. We want to, but we're just not sure that we're we're fully there yet as a community in our building and as a team. So I think while we had intended to come back to the office 50% capacity next week, my guess is that we're actually going to push to August. And so I think that's part of it. Tenants have to also be flexible and use the information that's coming from the news and from our local government to help make those decisions that are best for the employee. All the while knowing that I'm sure that our building management team would love to see more people back in the office because they're staffing the building now, hoping that people come back. But I think, it's a lot of empty office buildings downtown right now still. So what do we do? Like, what are our closing thoughts as we wrap up? What are some of the advice, what do you recommend? How can buildings stay in front of their tenants and ensure data is at the center of our mutual practice, something that we're both engaged in gathering and sharing? And any closing thoughts or recommendations?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just coming back to the return to work plan, one of the big guiding messages that we've been giving firms is you really need to make iteration and flexibility central to any of your return to work plans. As we know, we're moving into a world of many known uncertainties, and it's just very important to build in lots of flexibility to your plan. That's either to respond very quickly to new waves of infections, but also be ready to scale up best practice. So if there's something that you can see that's really working, get ready to scale that up across other buildings. And that's something we've already seen the retail sector has done particularly well. If they find an initiative works well in one store, they're ready to scale that out. And certainly what you were describing there, Patti, I mean, we're seeing a lot of firms actually push back their office re-entry plans, and there's a bit of a wait and see environment right now. People are seeing kind of, will there be another wave hitting us very soon? So I think kind of building in that flexibility to your return to work plan is very important.
Yeah.
And then just returning to your point about data. So we've been talking today a bit about the fact that kind of one of the barriers that's always held back this data conversation in the real estate world is around split incentives. We covered it at Verdantix for many years, the whole split incentives around energy data. Would the landlord really want to invest in this if the landlord is not going to directly benefit? Does the tenant really want to put in loads of energy monitoring infrastructure if they're going to be leaving the building within a few years? So I think we need to kind of look back at what's happened when we were trying to gather more granular energy data and take those learnings into this new world where we're looking for better well-being data. Something that I would say feels very different now to 5 years ago is that the cost of this, these sensors and the ease to deploy these sensors has really changed. We're now talking about sensors that can be really easily retrofitted, they're totally non-intrusive, and firms can deploy them and take them away. So if you are, as a tenant, looking to invest in sensors, many of the barriers have been taken down. At the same time, if you are looking for your landlord to take an active role, it feels the right time now to be having a conversation. They want to be holding on to you as a tenant in their building. And certainly right now, it feels as though the whole occupant health and safety angle is such a powerful driver that as a tenant, you should be saying, right now, I need this data to aid the re-entry of my workforce. And this is kind of primarily a need because of health and safety. And that feels a much more compelling need to some other initiatives that we have seen in the past that haven't really taken off.
Yeah, I love the comparison back to energy in the split incentives and kind of looking back, and advocates of healthy, safe, sustainable buildings can learn from that. And the one thing that comes to mind for me is, this idea of the green lease. There was a lot of movement, a lot of excitement around, let's do green leases.
Yeah.
And that would be the tenant's ability to go to landlord and say, I require these things. And a lot of times that wasn't necessarily driven by visibility into more data. It was, I want an energy efficient space. I don't want to be paying exorbitant amounts to heat and cool and lighting of my space. And I want, you could actually see some examples of leases. Have you seen any healthy building leases yet? Do you think that's the next, we'll have to put that in the hands of, the International Well Building Institute or someone who focuses on this topic, and see if there's some movement there, or just different, additions or addendums to leases that,
Yep.
Is that what you're seeing?
So I think we will definitely see that, and it feels to me that it will be mainly focused in that prime high end of real estate.
Yeah.
I've actually already spoken to a workplace manager based outside of the US, and he specifically told me when I look to take on new workplace, I will be thinking about the well-being variables of that area. Of course, alongside the usual considerations, which is around location, price, and what's in the lease, what are the obligations. So I certainly expect we will see this, particularly in that kind of high end of the market. Some landlords will want to stand out. They'll want to kind of mark themselves out of the competition. And if it's a way to help accelerate a tenant letting out a space, I think they'll certainly find it valuable to do that. But I think as well, Patti, you mentioned there, could we see any leases adjusted? And potentially, yes, if the tenant has enough power in that type of negotiation.
Yeah, I think that and if any of these other health organizations start to come out with some statements. It wasn't that long ago that cigarette smoking was allowed in office buildings, in restaurants. And you think about how fast we were able to shift in that. Once there was that global awareness that cigarette smoking indoors was causing harm to non-smokers, the uprising, and so, gosh, I hope it doesn't take more pandemics for us to prioritize health and safety in this different way, by providing more visibility to data and transparency. But it's certainly making us all talk about it more. Certainly making, I think, people look at the built environment that they're providing to tenants and to their own workers, think about it a little bit differently and maybe take on more of that responsibility. It's an interesting time, Susan. Any closing thoughts? I just appreciate your time this evening.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think certainly kind of your final comments there, Patti, we're certainly seeing that the vision for what constitutes a high-performing building has now significantly changed. Pre-COVID, it was a lot about energy efficiency and experience, but right now it feels as though when you think about a smart building, a high-performing building, you want it to be both of those things, but actually you want it to be a healthy environment. So I think the whole vision around healthy buildings will be with us for many years, and in many ways it's an extension to where the market was already going.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. This was fun.
Great.
Enjoyed.
Thank you for having me.